Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. Today we're tackling how children process trauma. And, a lot of people think it's always got to be through words, right? Talk therapy. But today we're going way beyond that.
Yeah.
We're diving into a method called SITCP, and that stands for Structured Sensory Intervention for Traumatized Children, Adolescents, and Parents. So
Wow.
SITCK basically uses sensory experiences, things like drawing, music even,
I
to help kids heal.
Yeah, that's exactly right. SITT key recognizes that trauma really impacts a child's sensory system. So it's all about giving them a way to process those experiences in a safe way,
Yeah.
a structured way.
So for this deep dive, we're going to be pulling from a couple of different sources.
Yeah.
We've got excerpts from a book, and we've got some research findings about SIT Kiki. One of the stories that really stood out to me in the book is about this teenager, Michelle, and she experienced abuse and a traumatic rape and was carrying so much guilt and shame. And she had tried traditional talk therapy, but it wasn't working for her.
Yeah. That's sadly pretty common, especially with younger children. They don't always have the vocabulary to put into words what happened. They have all these intense emotions, but they just don't have the words.
Right, and that's where SIT Kiki comes in, right? Because
Sure.
instead of just talking about the trauma, kids are encouraged to express it through sensory activities. So, like drawing or sculpting with clay, maybe even moving their bodies in ways that help release those feelings.
Exactly. And that's what we call externalization. It's one of the core principles of SITKPAP. By externalizing that trauma, kids can kind of step outside themselves, become observers of their own experience. So think about it. You can step outside of a painful memory and look at it from a distance. That's what SITKP helps kids do.
So it's like they're able to create a safe space where they can process those emotions without feeling completely overwhelmed.
Right. And when they do that,
Yeah.
they can sometimes remember details that they couldn't before because the emotions were just too much.
And that's exactly what happened with Michelle. Right after she drew the rape, she started remembering details that she had blocked out, and that was a huge turning point for her.
Because as she remembered those details, she realized that it wasn't her fault. And that realization is so important for healing to happen.
It's like she finally reframed the experience and saw herself as a survivor, not just a victim. And that's when things really started to change for her.
And that shift from victim to survivor, that's really at the heart of SITCAP. It's about giving kids that power back to reclaim their story and see themselves as strong and resilient.
Yeah, I love that. So what happened with Michelle after SIT Cap?
Well, she actually joined the school choir,
Hmm.
and she discovered that she had this amazing voice, and she just found this whole new sense of belonging and accomplishment.
So she found this really positive outlet to express herself. It's amazing how healing can open up all these possibilities, isn't it?
Absolutely. When kids feel safe and they feel empowered, they can finally start to explore their interests and talents. Michelle is the perfect example. She went from describing herself as sad and ignorant to pretty amazing.
Wow, what a transformation. So I think some people might be listening and they might be thinking, okay, that's just one story, though. Is there research to back this up?
Oh yeah, there is. Michelle's experience isn't just some feel-good anecdote. Research on SITCAP shows it's been used successfully for over 20 years. It's a short-term intervention, but it produces real long-term changes for kids. And get this,
Okay, I'm listening.
the research shows that SITCAP works even if the child's environment doesn't change. So even if they are still facing challenges at home or in the community, they can still use SITCAP to cope and thrive.
That's huge. That means that even in really tough situations, kids can still find a way to heal and build a better future for themselves.
Exactly. SITCAP helps them build inner resilience. It gives them a sense of agency, self-efficacy, even when things are hard.
And I'm curious, how widely available is this approach?
Well, another great thing about SITCAP is that it's designed to be flexible. So it can be used in tons of different settings, schools, hospitals,
Hmm?
community centers, and it doesn't require a ton of training to implement.
Wow, so it has the potential to reach a lot of kids. One question that I'm sure you get a lot, isn't there a risk of re-traumatizing a child by having them revisit these experiences?
That's a really common concern.
Hmm.
But the creators of SITCAP really took that into account. It's not about forcing kids to relive the trauma. It's about helping them revisit it from a safe place as an observer. And they're always in control. They can say yes or no to any activity.
So it's about making sure they feel safe and empowered throughout the process.
Exactly. The child's well-being always comes first.
And speaking of a child's well-being, what are some of the most important things that traumatized children need?
Well, the source material highlights a few key things. First and foremost, they need to feel safe. But they also need to know that their feelings are normal. And they need ways to communicate those feelings. and to feel connected to the adult world.
So it's about creating this supportive environment where they feel seen and heard and understood.
Yes, exactly. It's also about giving them the time and attention they need to heal and helping them replace those negative memories with positive ones.
I think this is a great place to transition to the next part of our deep dive. We've been talking a lot about Michelle's story and the overall concept of SITKP, but I'd love to dig into some more practical questions about how this works in different situations.
Yeah, let's do it. Actually, the source material has a whole section called Appendix A, What If Questions and Answers.
Hmm.
It's like they knew we were coming with these.
They totally did. So let's jump right in. What about if the trauma is really recent? Or what if it's not just one child? What if it's a whole family that's been through something?
Those are really important questions. Um, when it comes to recent trauma, the approach may need to be adjusted a bit. And for families who have all experienced the same trauma, the source material strongly suggests that they each have individual sessions.
Well, that makes sense. So each person has their own space to kind of process what happened, create their own trauma narrative.
Right, exactly. Because even within a family, each person is going to have their own unique experience and perspective.
For sure. So what about siblings? Would they be in sessions together or separately?
Ideally, separately. That way there's no pressure or competition between them. Each child can just focus on their own healing.
Okay, that makes sense. So now what if a child doesn't remember the trauma? Or what if they're nonverbal or on the autism spectrum? Can SITTK still be helpful in those cases?
Absolutely. That's the beauty of SITTK. It's so adaptable. So even if a child doesn't have specific memories, those sensory imprints from the trauma are still there. And for kids who are nonverbal, there are so many other ways for them to express themselves, through art or music or even movement.
Right. It's all about finding that right medium for each child, the one that feels the safest and most empowering.
Exactly. The goal is to help them communicate what happened, process it,
Mm-hmm.
without making them feel overwhelmed or re-traumatized.
We were talking about Michelle and how she used singing as an outlet. But what if a kid just hates to draw or do any kind of art stuff? Are there other options?
Oh yeah, for sure. Some kids might feel really vulnerable with drawing, so maybe they would connect better with clay. Or they might respond to listening to certain types of music, or even use movement or physical activity to work through their feelings.
So there's a lot of flexibility.
Tons. It's not like a one-size-fits-all thing. It's about tailoring the approach to what works best for each kid. It's interesting. The source material even includes a whole section on resilient resources for teachers. It's got tons of websites and organizations and even activities that teachers can use to promote resilience in the classroom.
That's amazing. Teachers play such a huge role in supporting kids who've gone through trauma. Having those extra resources can make all the difference.
Totally. Imagine a classroom where teachers are trained to understand trauma and they know how to respond in a way that's sensitive and informed. It could create such a safe space for these kids to heal and grow.
I love that. It really shows that healing can happen anywhere, not just in a therapist's office.
Exactly. It could be in the classroom,
Yeah.
in the community, at home. And that brings us back to Michelle's story. What really sticks out to you about her journey?
I think what's so inspiring is that it shows how healing can lead to such positive change. Michelle didn't just learn to cope with the trauma, she discovered these new passions and this whole new sense of herself.
Right. Her story really highlights that power of resilience that every child has.
And it reminds us that even when things are incredibly hard, there's always hope.
I love that. So what would you say is the most impactful takeaway from our deep dive so far?
For me, it's that emphasis on the subjective experience of trauma. SITCAP recognizes that every child is going to experience and process trauma differently. There's no one-size-fits-all approach.
That's such a crucial point. It's about honoring each child's individual story and making sure they feel heard and seen and validated.
Right, and I think that's a huge shift in how we approach trauma recovery. We're moving away from just focusing on symptoms, and we're starting to really understand a child's internal world.
We're seeing the whole picture, not just the surface.
Exactly.
And recognizing that healing is a process. It's not this destination that you reach. It's a journey.
And it's about making sure kids have the tools to navigate that journey.
With courage, with resilience.
It's really inspiring to see how an approach like SITCAP can empower kids to reclaim their stories and build a brighter future. Okay, so as we move into the final part of our deep dive, let's just recap some of the key insights we've uncovered so far.
Okay, that's good.
So we've learned that children process trauma through their senses, even if they don't have the words to express it.
Right.
And we've explored how SITCAP offers a safe and structured way for them to externalize those experiences. And that often leads to a feeling of empowerment and control over their trauma narrative.
And we talk about how adaptable SITCAP is. It can be used with kids who have experienced recent trauma,